The first gunshot nearly took Rosalie Summers' hat off as she ducked behind the water trough, heart pounding against her ribs like wild mustangs on the open plain. The second shot splintered Wood just inches from her face, sending splinters into her cheek. The third never came instead. Hoofbeats thundered down Main Street and a man's voice called out, "Get on, Miss Summers, unless you fancy dying today." Looking up, Rosalie saw him Zachariah Hayes atop his chestnut stallion, hand extended toward her, those familiar blue eyes blazing beneath the brim of his dust-worn hat. Behind him, on a lead rope, pranced a dappled gray mare she'd recognize anywhere. Starlight. The horse they'd once shared on midnight rides when everything between them had been possible. Zach. His name felt foreign on her tongue after 3 years of silence. "No time. Town marshals deputized half the saloon to bring you in." He leaned down farther, arm stretching. "Trust me one last time, Rosie." Without thinking, Rosalie grabbed his arm and swung onto Starlight's bare back in a single practiced motion. The mare danced beneath her, remembering her touch as familiar as breathing. As bullets kicked up dirt around them, Zach tossed her Starlight's reins and said words that made no sense against the chaos of the moment. "I brought her back to you. It's time to ride forever, Rosie, if you'll have me." Then they were racing out of Cottonwood Springs, Arizona territory, 1884, with nothing but dust and gunfire at their backs and the endless frontier ahead. Rosalie hadn't planned on becoming a fugitive that morning. She'd simply gone to confront Thomas Wiley, the banker who'd foreclosed on her father's ranch after his death. The argument had escalated, and when Wiley reached for his desk drawer for a gun or papers, she'd never know she'd drawn her father's revolver. She hadn't shot him, but the mere act of drawing on the most powerful man in Cottonwood Springs had been enough to label her an outlaw. Now, as they galloped across the desert, miles stretching between them and civilization, Rosalie finally allowed herself to look at the man riding beside her. Zachariah Hayes had left Cottonwood Springs 3 years ago after she'd rejected his proposal, choosing instead to stay and care for her ailing father. He'd promised to return, but as the months stretched into years with no word, she'd convinced herself he'd forgotten her. Yet here he was, as if conjured from her most desperate wish, older and harder around the edges, but unmistakably her Zach. "Where are we going?" she shouted over the wind and hoofbeats. "North for now," he called back, not slowing. "I've got a place, safe place, but it's 3 days hard riding." "You came back for me." It wasn't a question. Zach glanced over, his expression unreadable beneath his hat. "Never really left, Rosie." They rode until the horses were lathered and heaving, stopping only when they reached a small creek sheltered by cottonwood trees. As Zach helped her dismount, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and Rosalie felt the years between them shrink to nothing. "You're bleeding," he said, gently touching her cheek where the splinters had cut her. "It's nothing." Still stubborn as a mule. A ghost of a smile played at his lips as he reached into his saddlebag for a canteen and a clean handkerchief. "Sit." Rosalie obeyed, settling on a sun-warmed rock while Zach crouched before her, dampening the cloth and tenderly cleaning her wounds. The intimacy of the moment made her breath catch. "Why did you come back today of all days?" she asked, Zach's hand stilled. "Got word your father passed. I'm sorry, Rosie, he was a good man." 6 months ago, she whispered. "Consumption took him in the end. I would have come sooner if I'd known." His voice carried regret like an old wound. "Then I heard talk in Prescott that Wiley was moving to take your land. Figured you might need." He trailed off, seemingly unsure how to finish. "A rescue," Rosalie supplied with a hint of her old fire. "A friend," he corrected softly. The word hung between them, inadequate for what they'd once been to each other. "And Starlight," Rosalie glanced at the dappled mare drinking from the creek. "You kept her all this time?" Zach busied himself with the handkerchief again. "She was always meant to be yours. Your father gave her to me to train for your 18th birthday, remember? But then we started riding her together and," he shrugged, "when I left, it felt right to take her, like keeping a piece of you with me." Rosalie swallowed against the tightness in her throat. "And now I'm bringing her home to her rightful owner." His eyes met hers, blue as the Arizona sky, and asking if her owner might consider riding with me, not just to safety, but he hesitated. Forever this time. Before Rosalie could respond, Zach's head snapped up, his body tensing. Riders coming, at least 4. He was on his feet in an instant, gathering their meager supplies. We've stayed too long. They mounted quickly, Starlight prancing nervously beneath Rosalie as she sensed the urgency. As they prepared to depart, Zach reached across the space between their horses and squeezed her hand. "Whatever happens, stay with me," he said, his voice low and intense. "I won't lose you again." Then they were riding once more, deeper into the wilderness, the pursuit at their backs and the weight of unspoken words between them. By nightfall, they'd crossed into rough country, a labyrinth of mesas and canyons that Zach seemed to navigate by instinct. They made camp in a small cave, hidden from view by a stand of juniper trees. After tending to the horses, Zach built a small, smokeless fire, the flames casting golden light across the stone walls. "You've become quite the frontiersman," Rosalie observed as she watched him efficiently prepare a simple meal of jerky, beans, and coffee. "What have you been doing these 3 years?" Zach's hands moved with practiced precision. "Bit of everything, ranching in Colorado for a spell. Some scouting for the army, prospecting that didn't pan out." He glanced up at her. "Nothing that felt like home." The admission hung in the air between them, weighty with implication. "And you?" he asked. "After your father fell ill," Rosalie pulled her knees to her chest, staring into the fire. "Running the ranch, nursing Pa, fighting with the bank." She laughed softly, without humor. "Turns out cattle ranching isn't considered suitable work for a woman alone. No one would do business with me except at ruinous terms. That why you pulled on Wiley?" "He told me he'd been generous in allowing me to stay on after Pa died." Her voice hardened. "Said he'd let me keep working as housekeeper for whoever bought our land." "Our land, Zach. 3 generations of Summers' blood and sweat in that soil." Zach set down the coffee pot, his jaw tight. "Bastard." "I didn't mean to draw on him, but when he smirked at me like that." She shook her head. "Doesn't matter now, I'm officially an outlaw. Makes 2 of us then." At her questioning look, he grinned ruefully. "Let's just say I've had my own disagreements with the law these past years." Rosalie studied him in the firelight. The boy she'd loved had become a man, harder, more weathered, but his eyes still held that same steadfast intensity when they looked at her. "What did you mean before?" she asked suddenly. "About riding forever." Zach was quiet for a long moment, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups before answering. "Remember that last night before I left? We took Starlight out, rode to the high ridge overlooking the valley," she remembered. The moon had been full, turning the desert silver. They'd lain on a blanket beneath the stars, planning impossible futures. "You said someday we'd ride away together," he continued, passing her a cup. "Just the 2 of us, no boundaries, no one to answer to, find our own place in the world." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, sending warmth up her arm that had nothing to do with the coffee. "I was 18 and full of foolish dreams," Rosalie murmured. "Were they foolish?" Zach's voice was quiet. "I've spent 3 years chasing that dream, Rosie. Looking for a place that could be ours, and I found it." Her heart quickened. "What are you saying?" "There's land up north, good land. Remote enough to be safe, close enough to a small settlement for supplies. I've been working it for 6 months, built a cabin." His eyes held hers. "I came back to ask you to see it, to see if maybe what we talked about that night might still be possible." Rosalie's throat tightened with emotion. "Zach," a distant sound cut her off, the faint but unmistakable whinny of a horse. Zach was on his feet instantly, extinguishing their small fire with dirt. "They're tracking better than I expected," he whispered. "We need to move. In the dark, I know these canyons." He was already gathering their belongings. "There's a place they won't follow, but we need to go now." Within minutes, they were riding again, the moonlight their only guide as Zach led them through narrow passages between towering rock walls. Rosalie could feel Starlight's muscles bunching beneath her, the mare sure-footed despite the treacherous terrain. "We used to ride like this," she said softly, the memory washing over her. "Remember when we'd sneak out at night?" Ahead of her, Zach's silhouette nodded. "You were fearless, rode like you and that horse shared a single mind." "I wasn't fearless," Rosalie admitted. "Just brave because you were with me." He looked back at her then, his face half-shadowed in the moonlight, expression unreadable. For a moment she thought he might stop, might finally bridge the distance between them with more than words. But a shout echoed through the canyon behind them and the moment was lost. Almost there, Zach urged, pushing ahead. Stay close. The passage narrowed further, forcing them to ride single file through a gap barely wide enough for the horses. Then suddenly, they emerged into a hidden valley, a small oasis with a spring-fed pool reflecting the moon like a silver coin. We'll be safe here until morning, Zach said, dismounting. No one knows about this place except the Apache, and they won't betray its location to white lawmen. Rosalie slid from Starlight's back, legs stiff from hours of riding. How do you know about it? Saved an Apache boy from drowning 2 years back. His father, one of their medicine men, showed me this place. Zach took the reins from her hands, said it was a place of visions and beginnings. I've used it as a waypoint ever since. As he cared for the horses, Rosalie approached the pool, drawn by its otherworldly beauty. Kneeling at its edge, she glimpsed her reflection, wild-haired, dirt-smudged, a far cry from the proper rancher's daughter she'd once been. Yet she looked alive. More alive than she'd felt in 3 years. Rest, Zach said, returning to her side with a bedroll. Dawn's not far off, and we've another hard day ahead. She accepted the blanket but made no move to lie down. I can't stop thinking about what you said, about the land up north. Zach settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. What about it? Is it really possible for us to just disappear, start over? It's more than possible, he said, conviction in his voice. I've seen people do it. The frontier's still wild enough for second chances, Rosie. Even for a woman who pulled a gun on the most influential man in the territory, his laugh was low and warm. Especially for her. After a moment, he added more seriously, what Wiley did wasn't right or legal. Your father's debts weren't nearly what he claimed. I checked the county records before coming for you. Rosalie stared at him. You what? Spent 2 days in the land office in Prescott. Your father only borrowed against a quarter of the property. Wiley falsified documents after your father died, betting you wouldn't know how to challenge him. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. So he stole it. He actually stole our land. Yes, Zach nodded grimly, and I got proof of it, papers that show the real mortgage terms. Enough to clear your name, maybe even get the ranch back if we had a fair judge and you wanted to fight. Why didn't you tell me this before? His expression grew troubled. Because even with proof, Wiley has power and connections. Going back to fight means years of legal battles, maybe even danger. I wanted to offer you another choice. A new beginning without looking back. Rosalie fell silent, absorbing his words. The choice he presented wasn't simple, justice for her family's legacy or freedom with the man she'd never stopped loving. I need time, she finally said, to think. Time is the one thing we're short on right now, he replied, but his tone was gentle. But whatever you decide, I'm with you, Rosie, all the way. As if to seal his promise, he reached out, hesitantly at first, then more surely, and tucked a wayward strand of hair behind her ear. The simple gesture undid her. Before she could think better of it, Rosalie leaned into his touch, her hand covering his to keep it against her cheek. I thought I'd never see you again, she whispered. Every day for months I watched the road, waiting. I wrote, he said, voice rough with emotion, 12 letters. Did you ever get them? She shook her head. Not one. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Wiley, he controls the post. All this time I thought you'd forgotten me. Never. The word was a vow. There hasn't been a day I didn't think of you. The distance between them, 3 years and countless miles, seemed to collapse in that moment. When Zach leaned forward, his intention clear in his eyes, Rosalie met him halfway. Their lips touched, tentatively at first, then with the desperate hunger of lost time. His arms encircled her, pulling her against the solid warmth of his chest, and for the first time since her father's death, Rosalie felt something like home. When they finally parted, breathless and trembling, Zach pressed his forehead to hers. Whatever comes next, he murmured, we face it together. In the silvery light of the hidden pool, Rosalie made her first decision of their new life. She believed him. Dawn broke over the hidden valley, painting the rock walls in shades of amber and gold. Rosalie woke to find Zach already preparing for their departure, his movements efficient but unhurried. "Morning," he said, catching her watching him. "Sleep well, despite the hard ground and thin blanket she had." "Better than I have in months," she admitted, stretching the stiffness from her limbs. "How far to your place from here?" "2 days if we push hard, longer if we're being cautious." He offered her a strip of jerky and a drink from the canteen. "Thought we'd follow the high country. Less chance of running into trouble." As they packed up camp, Rosalie found herself studying Zach when he wasn't looking, noting the new lines around his eyes, the increased breadth of his shoulders, the confident set of his hands as he adjusted Starlight's saddle. He'd left Cottonwood Springs a determined young man. He'd returned a formidable one. "Tell me about the land," she said as they mounted up. "Your place up north." Zach's face softened with pride as they rode out of the valley. 160 acres along a river, good water, good grass. Valley protected by mountains on 3 sides. Winters are harsh, but the summers are green like you wouldn't believe. And the cabin, 2 rooms for now. Solid logs, tight roof, started adding on a lean-to for more space. He glanced at her, a hint of uncertainty crossing his features. "It's not much yet, nothing like your father's ranch house." "My father started with a 1-room shack," Rosalie reminded him, "said the finest homes grow with the families inside them." The implication of her words brought color to Zach's cheeks, and Rosalie found herself smiling, really smiling for the first time in longer than she could remember. They rode steadily through the morning, the terrain growing increasingly rugged as they climbed. By midday, they'd reached a high vantage point overlooking the vast expanse they'd traversed. "Look," Zach said, pointing back the way they'd come. "You can just make out dust, that'll be the posse." Rosalie squinted against the sun. Far in the distance, a faint cloud marked the passage of riders. "They're persistent. Wiley won't let go easily." Zach's expression darkened. "Men like him can't stand being defied, especially by a woman." "I shouldn't have drawn on him," Rosalie sighed. "It was foolish." "Maybe," Zach conceded, "but I understand why you did it." Some provocations can't be ignored. They continued north, the landscape gradually transforming as they rode desert giving way to scattered pinyon pines, then denser forest as they gained elevation. By late afternoon, they'd left the worst of the heat behind, the air growing cooler with each mile. Rosalie found herself reveling in the changing scenery, the freedom of movement after months of being trapped by circumstance. Beside her, Zach seemed to sense her mood, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories of his travels. The easy companionship they'd once shared returned by degrees. Comfortable silences interspersed with conversation that flowed as naturally as the streams they crossed. As dusk approached, they made camp in a small clearing surrounded by ponderosa pines. While Zach hunted for their supper, Rosalie gathered firewood, savoring the pine-scented air and the distant call of birds. He returned triumphant with 2 rabbits, which they roasted over the small fire. The meal was simple but satisfying, made better by shared company. "I've been thinking about what you said," Rosalie began as they finished eating, "about the proof against Wiley." Zach's attention sharpened. "And I want to see it," she said, "the documents you found." Without hesitation, Zach retrieved his saddlebag and extracted a leather portfolio, which he handed to her. Inside, Rosalie found land deeds, mortgage agreements, and bank drafts, all bearing her father's signature and detailing terms very different from what Wiley had claimed. "The original agreement was only for the south pasture," Zach explained, pointing to the relevant sections. 25 acres out of your family's 140, and the loan was nearly paid off when your father died." Rosalie studied the papers with growing anger. "All those extra payments I made, he knew I was paying for nothing. He was counting on your inexperience." Zach's voice was gentle but firm, "and on no one checking his claims. How did you get these? Let's just say the county clerk's office isn't well guarded at night." At her shocked expression, he smiled ruefully. "Told you I'd had my disagreements with the law." Rosalie carefully returned the documents to the portfolio. "This changes things, doesn't it? These papers are proof of fraud." "They are," Zach acknowledged. "But using them means going back to face Wiley and his influence. It means a fight for what's rightfully mine." determination steeled her voice. For my family's legacy. Zach studied her across the fire, his expression complex. Is that what you want, to go back? The question hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken implications. To go back meant choosing justice over the new beginning he offered. It meant choosing the past over their potential future together. I don't know, she admitted finally. Part of me wants to see Wiley pay for what he's done, but another part wants to ride forward, not back. Zach finished softly, their eyes met in the firelight, understanding passing between them. Whatever choice she made would define not just her future, but theirs. We don't have to decide tonight, he said, reaching across to take her hand. Let's get to safety first, see the land, then you'll know what feels right. His thumb traced circles on her palm, the simple touch igniting sensations that traveled up her arm and spread through her body. When he tugged gently, she went willingly, moving around the fire to sit beside him. With natural ease, his arm encircled her shoulders, drawing her against his side. Rosalie rested her head on his shoulder, inhaling the scent of him, leather and pine, and something essentially Zach that had haunted her dreams for 3 years. I missed you, she whispered, the words inadequate for the hollow ache his absence had left in her life. His only response was to hold her tighter, pressing a kiss to the crown of her head. They sat together in silence as stars appeared one by one above the pines, neither willing to break the spell of reconnection. Later, as they prepared for sleep, Zach laid their bedrolls side by side. The invitation was clear, but undemanding. He would be near, but would not presume more than she was ready to give. Rosalie made her decision without hesitation, settling beside him and drawing his arm around her waist. His breath caught, then evened as he pulled her close, her back to his chest, their bodies fitting together as perfectly as she remembered. Good night, Rosie, he murmured against her hair. Good night, Zach, she replied, closing her eyes against the pricking of tears, not of sadness, but of a joy so acute it bordered on pain. That night, she dreamed of riding across endless green valleys, Zach at her side and starlight beneath her, free and unbound by anything but the horizon. Morning came with a cold drizzle that dampened everything but their spirits. There was something intimate about breaking camp together, moving in coordinated rhythm without need for words. By the time they mounted up, the rain had stopped, leaving the forest fresh-scented and glistening. Weather's changing, Zach observed, glancing at the sky. We should make good time today, get as far north as possible before the next storm. They rode steadily through terrain that grew increasingly dramatic, canyons giving way to forested mountains, streams swelling into proper rivers. By midday, they'd climbed high enough that Rosalie could look back and see no sign of pursuit, just the vast, wild country they'd traversed. How much farther? She asked as they paused to rest the horses. We cross into the territory by nightfall, Zach replied. Then another day's ride to the homestead. Tell me more about it, she urged, curious about the place he'd chosen, the life he'd been building. Zach's face lit with enthusiasm as he described the rich bottomland along the river, the natural meadow where he'd started a small herd of cattle, the forest that provided timber and game. He spoke of the cabin's wide porch facing the mountains, the root cellar he'd dug for winter storage, the spring that bubbled year-round just yards from the door. It's good land, he concluded. Demanding but generous if you work it right. Reminded me of the Summers place, truth be told. Same feeling of possibility. The comparison touched Rosalie deeply. That he'd sought out land that reminded him of her home spoke volumes about how he'd carried her in his heart during their separation. And neighbors, she asked. You mentioned a settlement. Small town about 15 miles east, mostly miners and a few homesteaders. Decent folk, mind their own business. He hesitated. There's a widow there, teaches school, said she'd be glad to have help if you were interested in teaching alongside her. The careful way he mentioned this detail, a possibility for her beyond merely being his wife on an isolated homestead, confirmed what she'd always known about Zachariah Hayes. He didn't want to possess her, he wanted to partner with her. I'd like that, she said softly. I've always enjoyed working with children. His smile was worth every mile they'd traveled. They continued north, the conversation flowing easily between them as they relearned each other. Rosalie told him about her father's final months, how she'd read to him every evening, how peaceful his passing had been. Zach shared stories of his travels, the characters he'd met, the skills he'd acquired, the moments he'd wished she could have witnessed beside him. By late afternoon, dark clouds were gathering again, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Zach led them to a small trapper's cabin he knew of, abandoned, but still sound enough to provide shelter for the night. Not exactly luxurious, he apologized as they entered the single-room structure, but better than sleeping in a downpour. It's perfect, Rosalie assured him, already appreciating the solid roof as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. They cared for the horses in the lean-to attached to the cabin, then set about making the interior habitable. Zach got a fire going in the small stone hearth while Rosalie swept years of dust and leaves from the plank floor. Together, they created a cozy haven against the increasingly violent storm outside. As night fell, they sat close before the fire, sharing the last of their provisions. The wind howled around the cabin, driving rain against the single window, but inside, all was warmth and growing intimacy. "I've been thinking about the papers," Rosalie said eventually. "About Wiley and the ranch." Zach nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I want justice," she said, "but I'm not sure the ranch is where I belong anymore." She turned to face him fully. "The last few days riding with you, I've felt more alive than I have in years. The thought of going back to fight through courts and gossip and Wiley's influence." She shook her head. "It feels like putting myself in a cage." "What are you saying, Rosie?" His voice was carefully neutral, but hope flickered in his eyes. "I'm saying I want to see this land of yours. I want to know if it could be ours." She reached for his hand. "But I also want to send those documents to the territorial governor, let him know what Wiley's been doing. Maybe I won't get the ranch back, but other families might be protected from the same scheme." Relief and admiration softened Zach's features. "We can do that. There's a lawyer in Helena I trust. We can send the papers through him, anonymously if you prefer." "Good." She squeezed his hand. "Then I want to ride forward, Zach, not back." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over mountains. Without a word, he pulled her to him, his kiss conveying everything words couldn't: gratitude, joy, promise. Rosalie responded with equal fervor, her hands finding their way into his hair, drawing him closer. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "I never stopped loving you," he confessed. "Not for a single day." "Nor I you," she whispered back. "Even when I thought you'd forgotten me." "Never," he vowed. "You're carved into my heart, Rosalie Summers." Their next kiss deepened with newfound certainty, hands exploring with greater boldness, rediscovering each other's contours. When Zach's lips traced the curve of her neck, Rosalie gasped, arching against him. "Are you sure?" he murmured against her skin. "We could wait until we reach home." Home, the word resonated through her like a bell. "I've waited 3 years," she breathed. "I don't want to wait another day." Their coming together was tender yet fierce, a reunion of bodies that remembered each other despite the passage of time. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the cabin's walls, they created their own sanctuary of connection and promise. Later, wrapped in blankets before the dying fire, Rosalie rested her head on Zach's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His fingers traced lazy patterns along her spine, occasionally venturing up to play with her hair. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice a low rumble beneath her ear. "That I never expected to find happiness while running for my life," she answered honestly. "That maybe sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters." His arms tightened around her. "You haven't lost everything, you have me. And I promise you, Rosie, we'll build something even better than what was taken from you." She believed him. In the circle of his embrace, with the rain drumming on the roof and their future taking shape in shared whispers, Rosalie found a peace she'd thought forever lost. "Tell me more about our home," she urged sleepily. "I want to see it through your eyes before I see it with mine." Zach's deep voice painted pictures of sunlight on river water, wildflowers in mountain meadows, the cabin standing sentinel against winter snows. His words carried her into dreams filled with the promise of tomorrow, of a life rebuilt from the ashes of what had been lost. Morning dawned clear and crisp, the storm having washed the world clean. They set out early, riding with renewed purpose, the border between territories crossed without ceremony. The landscape continued to transform, growing greener and more lush with each passing mile. By midday, Zach's demeanor had shifted, an eagerness entering his movements as they navigated what were clearly familiar trails to him. When they crested a particular ridge, he reined his horse to a stop. "There," he said, pointing to the valley below. "That's it, that's home." Rosalie followed his gaze, breath catching at the sight. The valley was everything he'd described: a perfect basin of green cradled by mountains, bisected by a river that glinted silver in the sunlight. From this distance, she could make out the cabin nestled against the tree line, smoke curling from its chimney. "Smoke?" she questioned, glancing at Zach. "Is someone there?" "My neighbor, Jacob Roth. He checks on the place when I'm away, tends the stock." Zach smiled. "Good man, you'll like him." They descended into the valley, and with each hoofbeat, Rosalie felt something settle within her: a rightness, a belonging she hadn't expected to find so immediately. As they approached the cabin, she could see the care that had gone into its construction. Sturdy logs, a wide porch with a rocking chair, windows that would catch both morning and evening light. A gray-bearded man emerged at the sound of their approach, rifle in hand, until he recognized Zach, when his weathered face split into a welcoming grin. "About time you showed up," he called. "Was beginning to think you'd changed your mind about coming back. Had to make a detour," Zach replied, dismounting and extending his hand to the older man. "Jacob, this is Rosalie Summers." Jacob's eyes widened, then crinkled with understanding. "The lady you've been building all this for." He swept off his hat and bowed slightly. "An honor, Miss Summers. This boy's talked of little else but you for months." Rosalie felt warmth rise in her cheeks as Zach helped her dismount. "The honor's mine, Mr. Roth. Thank you for watching over the place." "Least I could do," Jacob replied. "Your cattle are doing fine. That new heifer dropped a healthy calf 3 days ago." While the men discussed livestock, Rosalie approached the cabin, drawn by its solid promise. The porch steps creaked pleasantly beneath her boots as she ascended, her hand trailing along the smooth, planed railing. Through the open door, she could see the main room, simple but thoughtfully arranged, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with chairs, shelves holding books and practical items. "Do you like it?" She turned to find Zach watching her anxiously from the bottom of the steps, Jacob having discreetly made himself scarce. "It's wonderful," she said, meaning it completely. "It feels like home," he supplied hopefully. "Like a beginning," she corrected, holding out her hand to him. He climbed the steps and took her offered hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that made her heart skip. Together, they entered the cabin that would be theirs. "I know it's not much yet," he began, but Rosalie stopped him with a finger to his lips. "It's everything," she said. "Because you built it for us." The kiss they shared then was a sealing of promises, standing in the threshold of their new life. Jacob stayed for supper, regaling Rosalie with stories of the area and of Zach's determined work on the homestead. He left as dusk fell, tipping his hat with a twinkle in his eye that suggested he knew exactly what the young couple needed most time alone. After he'd gone, Zach showed Rosalie around the property, the small barn where Starlight would live alongside his stallion, the garden plot already prepared for spring planting, the creek where he'd built a bench beneath a cottonwood tree. "It's perfect," she told him as they stood watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "All of it." "Not yet," he said, "but it will be." His arm around her waist tightened. "Now that you're here." That night, in the cabin that would become their home, they loved each other with a freedom born of certainty. The narrow bed creaked beneath them, but neither cared, lost in the discovery of new beginnings in familiar touches. Dawn found them tangled together, Rosalie waking to the gentle press of Zach's lips against her shoulder. The light streaming through the window turned his tousled hair to burnished gold, and she couldn't resist reaching up to run her fingers through it. "Morning," he murmured, smiling against her skin. "Morning," she echoed, marveling at how right it felt to wake beside him. After a breakfast of fresh eggs from the small flock of chickens Jacob had been tending, Zach disappeared briefly, returning with a determined expression and something clutched in his hand. "I've been saving this," he said, kneeling beside her chair, waiting for the right moment. He opened his palm to reveal a simple gold band set with a small, perfect pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "My father gave it to her when they started their life on the frontier. Seemed fitting." Rosalie's breath caught as he took her hand. "Rosalie Summers, I've loved you since we were barely more than children," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "I spent 3 years building a place worthy of you. Will you marry me, ride beside me for the rest of our days?" Tears blurred her vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Zachariah Hayes, I will marry you." The ring slipped perfectly onto her finger as if it had been made for her. When she looked up to meet his gaze, the joy she saw there mirrored her own. "When?" she asked. "There's a circuit preacher who comes through the settlement every few weeks," Zach replied. "Or we can ride to Helena for a proper ceremony. Whatever you want, Rosie." "Soon," she decided. "I don't want to wait." His smile was radiant as he rose to kiss her, sealing their engagement with a tenderness that promised a lifetime of such moments. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity as they settled into their life together. Rosalie learned the rhythms of the homestead, adding her own touches to the cabin curtains sewn from fabric purchased in the settlement, wildflowers arranged in mason jars, a quilt spread across their bed. Zach showed her the boundaries of their property, introduced her to the small herd of cattle that would be the foundation of their ranch. True to their plan, they sent the documents proving Wiley's fraud to a lawyer in Helena, along with a detailed account of what had transpired. Whether justice would come of it remained to be seen, but the act of sending the papers was liberating for Rosalie, a closing of one chapter before beginning the next. The circuit preacher arrived in the settlement exactly 2 weeks after Rosalie had come to the homestead. They were married in the small church, with Jacob Roth and the schoolteacher, Martha Wilson, as their witnesses. Rosalie wore a blue dress purchased from the general store, and Zach wore the only good shirt he owned, freshly washed and pressed for the occasion. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful, their vows exchanged with voices strong and sure. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zach kissed her with such reverence that several of the townspeople who had gathered to witness the wedding dabbed at their eyes. That evening, they rode home together on Starlight and Zach's stallion, the setting sun gilding the valley before them. At the cabin door, Zach surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained with a grin as he carried her across the threshold. Later, as they lay entwined in their marriage bed, Rosalie traced the contours of her husband's face with gentle fingers. "Happy?" he asked, capturing her hand to kiss her palm. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. 6 months passed, the seasons turning from spring to summer to early autumn. The homestead flourished under their combined care, the garden yielding vegetables in abundance, the cattle herd growing, the cabin expanding with the addition of a second room that would eventually become a nursery. Though neither spoke, this hope allowed yet. Word reached them through Jacob that Thomas Wiley had been removed from his position at the bank and charged with fraud, not just against the Summers family but several others. The territorial governor had ordered an investigation that revealed a pattern of corruption spanning years. Justice, it seemed, had found its mark. Rosalie received this news with quiet satisfaction, but no desire to return to Cottonwood Springs. What had once been her whole world now seemed distant and small compared to the life she and Zach were building together. In early October, as the aspens turned golden on the mountainsides, Zach surprised her with a picnic by the river. They rode out together on Starlight, Rosalie seated before him in the saddle just as they had when they were younger. "Remember the first time we rode double?" she asked as they followed the river's winding course. "You were teaching me to track deer." "I remember being so distracted by how you felt in my arms that I missed a buck standing not 10 feet away," he laughed, his breath warm against her ear. At a particularly beautiful spot where the river widened into a pool, they spread a blanket and shared the meal Rosalie had prepared, bread still warm from the oven, cheese, dried apples, and a flask of sweet cider. As they ate, Zach grew increasingly distracted, his gaze frequently drifting to the saddlebag he'd brought along. "What is it?" Rosalie finally asked. "You're a million miles away." "Not miles away," he said, reaching for the bag, "just thinking about the future." He withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "This arrived last time I was in town. I've been waiting for the right moment to give it to you." Curious, Rosalie unwrapped the parcel to reveal a leather-bound book. Opening it, she found blank pages of high-quality paper. A journal. She asked, running her fingers over the soft leather. "For our story," Zach explained. "I thought, someday we might want to write it down, how we found our way back to each other, how we started our life here." He looked suddenly uncertain. "It's silly, maybe." "It's perfect," she assured him, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Our children will want to know how it all began." His eyes widened at her phrasing. Children. Rosalie hadn't planned to tell him this way, but the moment felt right. Setting the journal aside, she took his hand and placed it gently against her abdomen. "In the spring," she said softly, "if all goes well." Joy transformed his features as comprehension dawned. In an instant, he had gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words couldn't: gratitude, wonder, love beyond measure. "A family," he whispered against her hair. "Our family." As the afternoon light turned golden around them, they lay together on the blanket, making plans and dreaming dreams. Zach's hand rested protectively over the place where their child grew, his touch reverent. "I was right to bring Starlight back to you," he said suddenly. "To ask you to ride forever with me." Rosalie smiled up at him, her heart so full it might burst. "And I was right to say yes." The future stretched before them like the open land they'd crossed to find each other, vast with possibility, rich with promise. Whatever challenges might come, they would face them together, side by side, as they'd always been meant to be. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, they packed up their picnic and mounted Starlight once more. The mare, sensing their contentment, carried them home at an easy pace, as if she too understood that their journey together had only just begun. Approaching their cabin with smoke curling invitingly from the chimney and golden light spilling from the windows, Rosalie leaned back against her husband's chest. "This is what forever feels like," she said softly. Zach's arms tightened around her, his lips finding the sensitive spot just below her ear. "No, Rosie," he corrected gently. "This is just the beginning." And as Starlight carried them the final distance home, Rosalie knew with absolute certainty that he was right. Their story begun years ago with a young man teaching a spirited girl to ride a dappled gray mare was not ending. It was unfolding, day by day, into something more beautiful than either could have imagined when they'd first dreamed of riding away together. It was, indeed, just the beginning of forever.